So the last part of this is going to be misleading graphs or graphs that can be misleading. So this is a common thing. Sometimes it's not purposely trying to mislead you, and sometimes it is trying to purposely mislead you, especially if it's on the news. It's usually on purpose. So we're going to go through trying to understand how we construct our graphs, like trying to do things that make it look cool, may they actually make it harder to read. So statistical graphs, when properly used, are powerful forms of communication. Unfortunately, when graphs are improperly used, they can misrepresent the data and lead people to draw incorrect conclusions. We discuss here three of the most common forms of misrepresentation. One is an incorrect position of the vertical axis. So we've always been told, maybe you haven't been told this, but when I was in school, you're always told that every time you construct a graph, you want to make sure it starts at 0. Which we've been not doing a lot, but that's partly just because of histograms you don't do that with. But a lot of times when you construct those graphs, you're supposed to center at 0, 0, and then look at everything. Incorrect sizing of graphical images. So that is a very common one because we're trying to show things, but we're focusing on vertical changes, but when we don't pay attention that we're also causing these horizontal changes that misrepresents data. And then we have a misleading perspective from three-dimensional diagrams. So three-dimensional diagrams can be a real pain. There's some really crazy ones out there. So the positioning of your vertical axis. So we call this, what we're going to be doing here is truncating the vertical axis. So this is something that is used not necessarily to trick you, but sometimes just to make data easier to look at. So the baseline of a graph is the value at which the horizontal axis intersects the vertical axis. When a graph or plot represents how much or how many of something, it may be misleading if the baseline is not 0. So you have this data here. This is the passenger traffic of Denver's International Airport. So it's like a time series, but we got each year, and then we see the millions of passengers along the side. And we're starting at 0. So we see here that we're getting here about, I don't know, what, 53 million passengers right here. Over here, we see it's like maybe like 61 million passengers. But one of the things we see here is there's not a big difference like between these couple bars here. They look like they're all about the same. So when we have like bars that are really close together, it's when we do this truncating the vertical axis. And we do this to make the data easier to look at when we're trying to look for changes. So these graphs are based on the same data, but they're both going to be different impressions because this one over here, I set the baseline at 50. Because just like over here, where I started showing, put on that line crossed was at 50. So everything's just above 50. And when I do that truncating, like I said, from 2012 to 2013 to 2014, 2015 even, you don't see a big difference in those bars. But when I truncated at 50, we can see there is some difference. So there was a little bit of decline here, then it started going up. So like I said, it's not always used for evil. Sometimes it's used for good because it gives me this general idea of what was going on. For some reason, 2013, there was a little bit of dip in traffic. Who knows why? But the problem is like I said here, it is a little misleading because it makes it look like traffic drastically increased between 2012 and 2018. Because if you're looking at this and you didn't know this 50, you might think like there's about 4 times as much traffic in the Denver International Airport in 2018 than was in 2012. And that is the problem with these graphs is that if you don't have time to stop and actually look at my scaling, you might actually get confused about what the data is really representing. I don't know if Fox News is as bad as it used to be, but Fox News used to be really bad about that, which is why I have an example of Fox News right here. So the same misleading information can be created with a time series. So we have this time series here. It's that same data, but as you see, there doesn't look like there's a lot of change going on here. There really isn't because this is like a change of, oh, let me see. This is maybe like 52 and this is maybe like 68 or something here. So there's not a huge change between 2012 and 2018. But if I truncate it there, then we see, oh, it looks like a much bigger change. And really, there's not much of a change. It's like less than 20 million passengers that are changing from here to here. So places you use this to be purposely misleading is maybe if you're trying to convince your investors or something like that that things are doing better, you might show them this data, but you wouldn't show them this graph. You'd show them this one over here where it's truncated because it looks like, hey, I'm pulling in a lot more people into this airport. So excuse the perspective. So for as an example, like I said, when I try to look this up to give you good examples, I get tons of Fox News. So trying to take it personally if you love Fox News, it's just something that happens with them. And this is old data, like this is all, I think, pre-2010. So and I haven't really watched Fox News since then, so it may be much better. But Fox News showed this chart on what would happen. So this was Bush Jr. if Bush Jr. tax cuts expired. So if you just saw this on the news, you know, it's going to pop up for a few seconds and they're showing this is what you're paying in taxes now. This is what you're going to pay as soon as those tax cuts are gone. Okay, this is 2013. So a little before 2010 or after. So it looks like it's this huge change, but you pay attention. What's saying here is that the tax rate is 35%. It's now going to be 39.6%. I mean, nobody wants to pay more taxes, but this is really misleading because it's looking like my taxes are increasing by, was that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times as much. So how is this misleading? There you go. Taxes look like they are increasing by 5-fold. So we're getting a lot more taxes when they are only increasing. Was it about maybe about 5%? I mean, a 5% increase in taxes, that's still not going to be good for most people. But like I said, it looks really misleading. So really these graphs are made to kind of scare people because you would look at it and before you can even see the numbers, you're like going, whoa, taxes increased a whole bunch. But you notice that we're scaling this at the bottom at 34%. So we scale at 34%. So then 35 doesn't look very, it looks very small. Where however, almost 40% looks really big in comparison. So these are just things to look out when you see any kind of graph on the news or in a newspaper. You definitely want to go back and try to look at that data again if you can, because frequently they will put things up like a quick flash and it's going to be set up in a misleading way. Like I said, this especially in news. If it's other things like academic journals or something, then it's probably just done to just kind of demonstrate that there was a, you know, okay, I know I'm going to say this name wrong. I do it every time. Sherry Shiravo. This was a woman who I think she had a cardiac arrest, and anyways, it put her in a vegetative state afterwards. So there was this big fight between her husband wanted to pull the plug because he said that was her wishes. She didn't want to be in a vegetative state, pull her plug and let her die. And her family was like, no, we want to let her keep her alive as long as we can. You know, I don't know what the idea was, if they were hoping that they could save her or not, but there was this big fight. So this ended up going through the court and it kept going up and up and up in the court. It did hit the Supreme Court, but I think the Supreme Court said this isn't our deal and pushed it back down to, I think, state courts or something like that. So anyways, CNN used this graphic. So I'm not picking on Fox News. CNN is just as bad. I used a graph similar to the one below to show who agreed with the decision to remove her feeding tube. So there was finally decided to, I think the husband did finally win and removed everything. And they let her die peacefully. But anyways, this was similar to a graph that put on CNN about removing this tube. So as you see, it's the percentage of people who agreed with the court's decision. So you see Republicans, Democrats, and independents by political parties. So if you look at this quickly and you didn't even notice this along the side, you go, oh, wow, like 3 times as many Democrats supported this. So kind of like, why would CNN display this data in a misleading way? What do they think they're gaining out of it? Because as you see here, there really wasn't a big difference here because this is 54% and this is 62. So this is a difference of 8%. It's not a big difference there. So the reason that they would do this, or at least I think they probably would have done it, is it in a way it's making it's like this way of like the Democrats are more sympathetic to the situation. More sympathetic. And I'm guessing if I was to make my good guess here, they're maybe become more sympathetic than the Republicans. They probably don't care about the independents so much. There's lots of stuff. If you look at a lot of data that's political data, a lot of times Democrats and Republicans aren't varying that much on topics, or at least back in the day. This was a long time ago. But back in the day, definitely they weren't varying that much on topics. So this is just a kind of a way to sort of shove it in a direction where it's like, hey, look at the Democrats favored this a lot more than Republicans, when there really wasn't a big difference in between them. So just another question. If the baseline of the bar graph or time series plot is not at 0, then the differences may appear to be what? Larger or smaller? So as you see, it's done to make differences look larger, and sometimes that's just to make the data easier to look at, or sometimes it's meant to try to trick you. So here, just to meant to fool you, make you think the Democrats were maybe better, because maybe that's what CNN wanted. Fox News wanted you to be worried that all of a sudden we took away those Bush tax cuts that Bush so kindly gave us. Then all of a sudden your taxes were going to skyrocket and go really, really high. So you always got to be careful with news because news isn't really fair and independent. Okay, and I just want to point out, because we're using this and talking about a political sense, because that's really the best way to show this misleading data when the places it's really used, especially truncated graphs. Just want to put it out there that I'm not supporting any party here. That's why I tried to stick it between, we have Fox News and we have CNN, always at battle with each other, but both of them are always trying to support their fan base.